Welcome back to this week's episode of Promising Young Surgeon. Before we jump in today, I'm going to share an update and a few words with you all. I've talked about this before on the show, but my ENT residency experience really had me coming out of it feeling like I wasn't good at anything, couldn't do anything, was what just wasn't competent and wasn't confident. I was so beaten down that I really didn't know who I was, and I didn't believe in myself. It's been really transformative over the past year to tackle the steep learning curve of podcasting and to feel like I finally remembered who I really am, which is a person who can handle tough conversations, loves meeting new people, and is not afraid to express herself. Because again, my residency training experience made me feel like I could not handle those conversations. Like I was terrified of people, especially people I didn't know. And I did not feel comfortable, you know, being myself. But all this to say, that is the power of putting yourself out there and trying new things. And I want to thank you all for being on this ride with me for the past year. Today is my 51st episode of Promising Young Surgeon and the penultimate one. After the 52nd episode next week, that will bring us to a full year of Promising Young Surgeon, and the show will not be returning to air after that. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for tuning in, and you can always connect with me online or find me on my new show launching this spring, Surgeon Interrupted. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Cindy Lee Neighbors. She'll share her experiences dealing with trauma, advocating for change, and ultimately transitioning from medicine to writing. If you've ever felt like the system wasn't made for you, then this conversation is. Dr. Cindy Lee Neighbors is a retired U.S. Army physician, writer, and advocate for mental health, education reform, and women's rights. Born and raised in Honolulu, she pursued acting in Los Angeles, earning a theater degree from the University of Southern California before embarking on a career in military medicine. She graduated with honors from the Uniformed Services University and was inducted into AOA. She then went on to ENT residency with several research publications and conference presentations nationally. Cindy's debut memoir, Too Much, is a raw and honest account of her experiences navigating mental health challenges and fighting for change within the demanding field of military medicine. The book delves into the complexities of trauma, resilience, and self-discovery, offering a powerful and inspiring story for those who face similar struggles. Cindy is also an accomplished children's book author with her debut title, Benji and Brianna Become Booger Doctors, and a coloring book spin-off series, Adventures in Surgeryland, on the horizon. She is committed to destigmatizing mental illness and empowering others to find their voice. When she's not writing, Cindy enjoys traveling, hiking, and scuba diving. Cindy, thank you for being here and welcome to Promising Young Surgeon. It's such a joy to have you here. And, I always talk about this on the show, but I love a Renaissance woman or jack of all trades, really, which I feel like you are. Like you've lived so many lives, and we already know that about you from your intro.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
I think that it helps people really have more perspective when the going gets tough, having lived all these different lives, having especially jobs, an identity, career experience outside medicine. And I think it also helps us bounce back more quickly than someone where maybe the only thing that they know or have experienced is in medicine. Kind of to just start at the beginning, because of course we're going to get into your story here. What drew you to the military path in medicine once you knew that you wanted to become a physician?
Wow, that's a great question because I didn't always want to be a doctor. I kind of, for lack of a better term, stumbled onto this path. And I talked about that briefly in the beginning of my book, but it was really for money reasons. I was very allured to the prospect of having, a free ride to medical school, and I had some options, and one of them included taking out a loan to a really nice school kind of in the middle of nowhere in the US, but it's a really great school. And then a couple other schools waitlisted me in California. But I really liked the concept of serving my country. And when I interviewed at the military medical school, I kind of talked about how it seems so exciting to go on these humanitarian missions and the idea of maybe going back home and doing my residency, in Hawaii, which is where I ended up, seemed really exciting to me. And was so naive to what the military really was. Unfortunately, I was walking around interview day and I saw a lot of females in uniform and they all seemed really happy. I was just so impressionable and so young. And it was one interview day, right?
Right.
Um, and it sounds stupid, but I didn't do a ton of research on it. It was just like a Kool-Aid commercial. Everybody was like, yeah, this is awesome. It's free. So what could have possibly gone wrong? So, and all the movies I had ever watched, Saving Private Ryan and stuff, really glamorized being in the military. But you obviously didn't see much about women in the military, right?
Right. They're definitely not like female protagonists. I
No,
agree
I
there.
mean, it was like G.I. Jane and that's it. And, everybody loves Demi Moore. So it was like, yeah, sign me up. Why not? What are the risks? They don't really talk
Mhm.
about it.
No, they
And
don't.
so, my parents at the time and we weren't really talking too much. So I didn't really tell them about it. It sounds awful, but it wasn't like I weighed a lot of my decisions with them. It was kind of like I signed up, you know? And I
Yeah,
think this is a
understood.
conversation, yeah, when most people, I would say, in their kind of early teen or not early teens, sorry, late teens, early 20s, sign up to be in the military. I imagine a lot of people have a conversation at least with their parents to say, "Hey, I'm thinking of joining the military." They probably mention it to their parents, I would hope. Um, but I didn't have that conversation.
Mhm.
Is another thing that, you know, is interesting that I wonder if I did, would that have changed things? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I made that
Yeah.
decision all on my own.
I think it's easy to, say hindsight is 2020. I think that one thing that really jumps out to me about what you're saying that I can identify with, and I think, of course we're gonna get into residency training, and you and I both were ENT residents in a past life here. But what strikes me is when you say, that you didn't always you didn't always dream of being a doctor, and I think that it hits home for me because I also did not always dream of being a doctor. And when push comes to shove, like when I think about during training, the really like traumatic, the really worst parts of it, the most horrible parts where like many of us trainees at once were all going through it. Um, a co-resident of mine did she she handled things very well, and she had always wanted to do this. Like, she maybe was the 3-year-old with, like, I mean, hopefully not a scalpel, a fake scalpel, a plastic one. Like, this was always the dream, and so even in the absolute worst of it, I think that was processed differently by someone who was like, "It was always this, this is what I chose, I love it." Whereas I was kind of like, I just want to contribute to the world. I want to do honest work. I do, want to help people. I think I have a good skill set for this. But when people then start abusing you at work, like I was like, "Oh, I don't think I wanted this enough to tolerate tons of abuse." So maybe that, yeah, I think that part of our history is similar in that way. And it means that maybe you have different boundaries than the person who would give up anything to do this.
And that's such a fascinating point you bring up because, you know, I see that in other people where, I grew up in a world where I was surrounded by people just pushed to achieve great things. And I'm sure you can relate on that level. Like you said, kids who from the very beginning, either their parents were doctors or lawyers or whatever. And from a young age, they knew they always wanted to be a doctor. And I never had that feeling. But I was always studious, right? Just like I'm sure you were as well. And like you said, just witnessing the different tolerance levels that people have for the things that we've seen and experienced, it's just fascinating to see. It's like, wow, you really have to have that drive and passion, I think, from a young age to be like, okay, like that's really interesting and admirable that you will accept and tolerate this because from whatever age you wanted this life or this job or career, like good for you, but I don't want this, I just don't have that drive or passion to, there's other things and other ways that I can contribute to the world. And I think that's something humans all want at the end of the day. Like we all want to be part of something, it's boring otherwise. We're all here on this planet to do something. We're not just going to sit around, twiddle our thumbs and stare at the sky. That's boring, I think we can all acknowledge we all want to be part of this world and, contribute in a meaningful way. Even if you think about it, trolls who go and comment on social media and they hate on people, you have to recognize they're doing that because they want to be part of something, And it's sad
That's
that,
interesting. Yeah.
right. I study a lot of things, and part of what I study sometimes is the psychology of social media. Because I've had to do something with my time and why people do the things they do, just because a lot of it is just so fascinating to me.
Yeah, no, I do think that it's a good point, and maybe it's a good reminder to me, when I encounter the haters online and things like that. I will say that an old piece of advice that somebody gave me when I was 20, and I think about it, I'm haunted by this because I am like, ah, I don't even know that I want this advice. I don't personally really give this advice, but I'd love to know your take on it. Which is you mentioned that that you have like other skills, other things that you can offer the world and like bring to a workplace. And when I was 20, an older med student, almost general surgeon, told me, knowing that I was now interested in going into ENT surgery because I was working in an ENT outcomes research office. He said, if you can see yourself being happy doing anything else other than surgery, do that. Surgery's not for you. Like, and so really that's another way of him kind of indirectly saying what we're touching on. Like, it almost requires or demands these types of people who can't see themselves wanting to do anything else, being happy doing anything else. But I think that then the whole workforce loses out because of that. Cause like we already have a doctor shortage, right? Like I say this all the time. I sound like a broken record. We have a doctor shortage. So if you'll only take those people where this is the only thing that they can do, you're just not going to have enough doctors.
Yeah, that's a scary thing to think about because I think more and more people are realizing that it's a very self-sacrificing profession. It, it really takes a toll on someone's physical and mental health. Um, I think people are realizing it's not just a money thing, it's a lifestyle thing. At the end of the day, you're sacrificing so much time that you could be spending, and even if you choose not to have a family, outdoors in nature, you know, um, eating quality food, getting quality sleep, you know, um, reading books, just things that other people, I want to say normal people, get to do in life. And I really think that just calls on a reexamination of the medical system as a whole. Because if we want to continue to have reasonable and affordable healthcare and not have these shortages of medical people in the world, then, there really needs to be an examination of the system as a whole, like how we are treating each other, you know, in the healthcare system, because a lot of people are leaving. And I think it doesn't just reflect on the hours, but the quality of the hours as well.
100%, 100%. Well, I would love to dive into, like, I know that a lot of themes in your book, of course, misogyny, racism, like a big part of your story and your life experience is residency, is ENT residency. And so, of course, I would love if you would share your story with us and we can kind of talk about, I'm sure that we do, like we've talked about, have many things in common. Another way that we differ is, of course, because that you were in military medicine and I wasn't. I was in civilian ENT residency. So, of course, yes, there's similarities, there's going to be differences, but I'd love to jump into it.
Yeah, no, and I don't want this to be like a sounding board for me, because I know some of the feedback I've gotten on the book is like, "Oh, wow, she's pointing fingers at all those people she worked with and it's never was her fault." Which has been hard for me to see some of the feedback. And so I've thought really long and hard about how to present this here in our discussion. Because unfortunately, in our world right now, misogyny, racism very much does exist, and it has always existed, but it makes it really hard to advance as a society, right? And so these are still important topics to talk about, whether or not people want to say I'm sitting here pointing fingers at the people I worked with and the people many other people work with on a daily basis. Um, but a lot of people have also reached out to me expressing that they've had similar experiences in military medicine and civilian medicine, which has been pretty shocking because, I felt like I was kind of in my own little world. And throughout my time in residency, what really helped me get through and not go to extreme measures such as like, committing suicide or harming other people was writing and behavioral health. So I felt that I was in a very oppressive environment where I couldn't be myself, to the point where, I was walking on eggshells around every single person in the hospital. I was carrying like a little notepad with me in my scrub pocket because it was that bad. Or I still have it, my little notes section. Like, it's pretty wild. I started thinking about writing op-eds when I was in my intern year. And so I would have a little running thing of like, this is going to be an awesome title. Like, one day I'm going to write, the New York Times. Like, this is it. This is my breakout moment. I've always loved writing, but it was something during residency where I was like, I can't believe this person just said this to me. Like, they want a piece of work. So I would like write, like, keep little notes in my phone. And it was just, my note section just started adding up. And or like I have like so many journals. I'd go and run to my desk and be like, this guy, today said this. It was insane because that's how I kept myself alive, essentially. It was like, dear diary, like, this guy said this today, and that is not okay. This is not okay. And eventually I think in my book, I started talking about how, I was cracking. I was like, I know what I'm going to do. I was like, I'm a genius and I'm going to write a fictional novel and change all the characters. But it was really hard, actually. I give many props to people who write fiction. It's just really difficult to make whole new worlds, but you want to tell your story still. Yeah, I'm like, I got it. I'm going to name this person so and so. I was like, dang, that sounds awfully a lot like the original character. It's like, and they sent this today, and I was like, damn, this sucks. I was
Yeah.
like,
Oh my
back
gosh,
to the
I've been
drawing board.
there.
Yeah.
Quite literally, when I was writing like an earlier draft of my first book, which is like a literary nonfiction memoir, just the mere act of, because I wasn't even doing fiction like what you're describing, having to build a new world. I just had to change some names, and I literally gave 2 different guys the same name. I was just phoning it in. I was like, whatever, Dan." Like, but I gave, like, I gave, like, 2 X's and a preceptor at one point, just all day. I was like, "Oh, whatever." Like, these were white guys, and they all ended up with the same name in a very confusing way, so I had to now I have, like, a name decoder set up because you're
Oh,
so
that's,
right.
yeah.
Like, especially
Yeah.
for people like me who, like, I can be prone to rigid thinking, and so just, like, coming up with a name that isn't their real name, I'm like, "Well, what?" Their name's their name. And then, like, if you
I
put
know.
into the machine of my brain, like, "Well, no, make up some different believable names,"
Yeah.
everyone ends up named Dan.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so those are the things that I ended up spent like towards the end, a lot of my time was allocated to world building or like, things to help me because I had to escape my daily reality I did eventually. And then that's the thing I want to talk about too. I ended up doing, you know, in my time of behavioral health, I ended up unfortunately using, and we can talk about this too, stimulants like Adderall, and sedatives. And I was drinking a lot, and that's obviously something I don't recommend to people for escaping their daily problems. But I was working, trying to stay in residency, thinking I'm going to write. I was actually at this point, I was inquiring with the ACGME, the American Board of Otolaryngology. I was writing the New York Times. I was writing my local newspapers. I was writing congressional leaders. I was writing a lot of people. I was, I had hired a few lawyers. I mean, things were getting a little dicey for me. And so, yeah, I started going down like, the legal, and I don't want to call it legal, but using legal substances in an illegal way. Right. And
Well,
so,
just for those, listeners who haven't yet read your book, can you kind of, like, set the scene with what it was like in your residency, just, like, broadly? Because like,
sure.
setting up the
Yeah.
environment that it was that you were responding to in this way. Because absolutely, I know that doesn't come out of nowhere, and, like, these coping skills are a
Right.
response to a system.
Yeah, and it's really hard to kind of pin it down in a few minutes, which if that's why I felt so compelled to write a whole book about it. But like, okay, we talk about, microaggressions in the workplace, which I think is a hugely important topic. And then we talk about like blatant violations of like sexual harassment and gender discrimination, but there's so many shades to it. But for example, and this is one thing I discussed, I was told I had resting bitch face, which is something that somebody I had worked with denied when I reported it. And that was really one of the big breaking points for me. Because to me, that was a boundary that was crossed that I was not willing to tolerate. Because one, I've always had insecurities about the way I look and talk. I come from a background of theater and acting. And when I was younger, that was actually, I wanted to be an actress. So that was like a big insecurity thing, like, commenting incessantly about the way I look and talk in my peer evaluations and my formal evaluations was not something I was okay with. I was like, you are crossing a line that one, you're not even talking about my surgical skills. Like you're continuing to comment on the way I look and sound. I'm not in acting school anymore. I intentionally chose a career that doesn't focus on my appearance because I wanted to get away from that and contribute to society in a way that doesn't objectify me as a sex object or something that can be manipulated in a way that, is used for like entertainment based on, using me as a puppet, right? Because I get that. I understand the entertainment background a little bit, right? I worked since I was like 12 years old. I booked my first commercial and stuff, and I was in pageants when I was a little girl. I didn't appreciate that. So to be in, when I talk about misogyny and in a workforce where men think it's okay to tell you to smile like, you should smile more. Or, like, why don't you talk in a certain tone? Like, no, but bro, like, why don't you talk in a certain tone when you talk to women? How about that? Because if I wanted a man to tell me how to talk and smile and look, I would be back in LA trying to be an actress. There is a reason I'm here as a military medical doctor trying to be a surgeon. Like, don't tell me how to look and talk. You're not a director or producer on set. Like, this is not Grey's Anatomy, And so that's what I really wanted to say. And I should have done and said, but had I done that and acted that way, I probably wouldn't be here able to tell my story like via a book or whatever and, spread that message in a different way, right? Because that conversation would have just ended in an OR. So I never had the bravery to say that kind of stuff to somebody in real life. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know what to say when men were telling me, and it got to the point where I was influenced in such a way where I was learning how to use Botox on myself. I had my co-resident put lip filler in me because I wanted to still be the cool, pretty girl, right? I had that influence in me from when I was very young. And again, I come from a really unique background where I've always wanted to be cool and popular and pretty. And so it was really hard to steer away from that. And it really dug at my insecurities. And so they knew how to like manipulate me in a really sick, twisted way. And psychologically, it really got to me. Right.
I'm
And so
sorry that you had to. Yeah.
we never got to focus on it. And when you look at another thing I reported to the ACGME was my surgical case numbers. It's insane. I left after 5 years. They dismissed me, right? But I was there for 5 years. I had 0 otologic cases as a senior resident. I mean, we wanted to say I had 5 because I sat there, and at the end of like the attending, drilling the mastoidectomy and preparing everything, like doing the KTP laser so that I could place the prosthetic stapes or whatever you call it. It's been 2 years. I did that. And he's like, okay, that's a case. It's like, no, that's not a case. That's not a case. This is like all fraudulent so that people can get cases. And you kept me here for 5 years, adding on cases. So at the very end, I deleted like 30 of my cases. It's like, I never did a single neck dissection. And my ex-husband, we did end up getting divorced, but he always was on my side for a lot of this because he noticed too, he would kind of follow my case numbers and he'd be like, why are you always in peds cases? Like, it's a little bit kind of sexist, don't you think? And I'd be like, yeah, it's interesting because I noticed somebody wrote a paper about comparing case numbers for men and women who graduate from ENT to look at the numbers, just look at the number of cases that men and women report that they do, and that's an interesting study. So I think if we want to break things down like this, people need to do like quantitative studies to see how many cases do men and women get to do as the primary resident, and let's not lie about these numbers, because that was something that came up a lot. Is I didn't get to do cases. I was assigned to like 3 clinic days a week, 1 surgical day a week. When I did cases, they were like, I was doing ear tubes as a 4th-year resident. I was doing tonsillectomies as a 4th-year resident. I learned how, I was so good at doing tonsillectomies as a 4th year. I could do them within like 3 minutes, which is great. But it's like, dude, this is so inappropriate,
Yeah, understood.
You're not teaching me how to do neck dissections for a reason. You're not into, that's also how I knew. I was like, they're not going to graduate me from this program. They have absolutely no intention to graduate me. So these were little things to look out for.
At what point did you know that they wouldn't graduate you?
So it was like, I think I wrote in the 2nd year, the RBF incident happened. And that's when I kind of escalated things to the GME director. And mind you, I was also having by the after that I had some psychological issues after that. I had to kind of do some outpatient rehab stuff because things started getting really rocky between some of the attendings and I. Um, and then it was pretty much after the second year because there was just so much friction. After you report somebody so senior to you and you only have like 10 people in your department, you realize like, wow, it's really hard to work with this person 8 hours a week. And they're definitely not going to put me in their OR.
For
And when
sure.
somebody doesn't put you in your OR, it holds you back from learning surgically. You spend the next year or two only really perfecting tonsillectomies and ear tubes and learning how to do Botox and filler. It's just like, huh, I'm not going to graduate just based off the standards.
Of course, I wanna say, I'm sorry for what you had to go through. I definitely I can identify with elements of it, and others I just, like, my heart breaks for you, and, I know that you have a lot of compassion for yourself back then, and I try to have compassion for myself back when I was a resident, but, you know, what's so interesting is I will say just on this OR part where you're absolutely right. Like I don't I 100% I follow you. I agree with you. In that case where now there's retaliatory behavior after reporting, say an attending is keeping you out of their OR. Yes, that impacts learning. But what's so interesting is in my case, I kept myself out of unattending's OR, and that was my call. I said, "Oh, you don't know how to be professional in the workplace. You're not professional, you know, you're you're kind of like to stop short of the station or whatever." I'm trying to think of like a non-explicit, way to convey my opinion of this person, but like I reported their behavior, it got escalated. I was like, "I would love to hear it. If anyone administratively has a defense of this type of behavior." They didn't. They were like, "No problem. You never have to go in that OR again." And I didn't. But of course, the outcome, I agree with you. Like the outcome's the same, which is that then my education was impacted by that. I don't have any regrets about it. I'm not like, "You know what? I should have like eaten more and I should have spent more time in that OR." Not at all. I sleep fine at night. But if somebody's primary goal was to get a high quality surgical education and as much like operative exposure as possible, then guess what? Then that would be a problem. And so it's so interesting because either way you slice it, like no matter even who the party is, it's like, I'm not going to operate with you. The trainee suffers. What's so funny is yeah, it's funny because even that attending was like, I'm willing to work with you again, like, I was a good resident, so I bet you wanted to work with me again. I won't work with you." And so, obviously, I get even with a lot of what you're saying, I was hearing this rage that I have really experienced myself, and so, I get it. I wanted to mention too, real quick, going back to the resting bitch face. Well, first of all, it's nice to meet another member of the club. I mean, I've been getting comments like that since I was in like second grade. So I stay in that in that club. But it's so interesting because having, of course, like connected with a ton of female surgeons in this space, it's like on those evaluations, which don't even get me started on how the evaluations are done, but yeah, just occasionally with no warning, you'll get, like a email that's like, "Okay, check your evaluation." And with women, like with female trainees, I just overwhelmingly hear about and see either in the communications and like professionalism, like how you carry yourself. Either you are confident, and then it's like you might be overly confident. Like, this woman is arrogant, and I worry that she thinks she knows more than she knows. Or it's she's too passive. This woman is like too quiet and shy and passive. I don't know that she's going to have what it takes to like lead a team. Pretty binary. Like that's what it is. Whereas with men, it's so funny because I can imagine two male surgeons with the same dispositions. And the more confident, outspoken one, he will be like a natural leader. Like, let's make him the CEO. And then the quieter one, it will be like, that's a respectful sponge. Like, he's just sitting there, just thinking. He's following everything that you're saying. Like, like, yeah, Dan, since Dan's like my chosen name for all these white guys. Dan just sits there and like, yeah, he doesn't talk that much, but like he knows the answer. And like when he does talk, people listen. Like that's literally how diametrically opposed the feedback is for like women and men in the same program. That's very helpful what you're saying about to current trainees or future trainees, things to look out for in terms of like I have seen this, I've heard of it in many cases. you know the department can turn against a trainee, and it can happen at any point in training, and it's very you know I mean, it's life changing to deal with, and guess what, there's not like resources for it. There isn't a page for that on the ACGME website that's like, my department's trying to kill me. Like,
It's terrifying because you spend, X years in college, right? Then med school, and then you get to residency, and you basically have sacrificed a decent chunk of your life towards this career. And all of a sudden, one person or one event can happen, and your career's down the trash, you know? And you're basically, then you're blacklisted from all of medicine. Because if you don't want to do another specialty, then you're done, right?
yeah. You've mentioned like communications with the ACGME, and so what was that like in your experience? And do you have tips for people who might have to deal with that themselves?
So it's funny. I did read about this a bit here and there online before I approached them, and everything I read online was like, "Don't do it. You're gonna sink your career if the minute you reached out to the ACGME, it's over." And I was like, "Well, really? That sucks." Um, it's like, well, then what's the ACGME for? If you're gonna reach out to the ACGME and they're gonna do nothing for you and your career's over, like that can't be true. And I think what happened to me is multifactorial, but I did go on their website and there's multiple ways you can reach out to them. One is like anonymously through their ombudsman office. I guess that word. But you can do that, and they say that your complaint is anonymous. But when you're in a very small program like ENT and you're a female and there's like one or two of you and you're like, I'm a minority, and there's gender discrimination. And they're like, we got a complaint about gender discrimination. They're like, gee whiz, I wonder who it was. It's not really anonymous, right?
Right.
So that would be
100%.
my advice, is when you're kind of reaching out about a very specific event or complaint, such as like harassment or gender discrimination or something like that, then it's not really anonymous. So I could see how people online, like Reddit or whatever, are like, hey, yeah, when you come forward with something, it's pretty much game over for you. It pretty much is, because then what happens is everybody's like, well, this person complained. They're just, can't handle it. And they're going to complain about everything. And they're just trying to destroy a reputation. That was the feedback I got a lot, was like, you're just trying to destroy a reputation. It's like, dude, and I did write this point. It's like, there would be nothing to destroy. Like, if you could just be like a decent, considerate people, like, well, I'm going to have to complain in the first place if you didn't go around saying I had resting bitch face. Like, why don't you just learn how to treat women? It's not that hard, I would think. But apparently, if we look around at the world today, it is hard to know how to treat women. So, in my defense, I do think it is important to speak about because it's just getting worse and worse. And so, I am not sorry about what I've said and done because I do think that those people still need to acknowledge their wrongdoings and should learn from it, because I don't think it's okay to tell women how to look and dress and act and talk. Um, I'm not their girlfriend or wife. And I hope if that's how they treat their partners at home, like that, they don't do that. That's not okay. You know, I
Absolutely.
think that's misogyny.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where they're from and that's old school and that's kind of like a cultural thing, but I could be radical for thinking that women should do what they want within in regards to like, their freedoms.
Yeah, their own appearance. Yeah, but
As long as they're being respectful. I wasn't going around and be like, flipping the bird and being like, go to hell. You know what I mean? And that's how it made them see how they made me seem like I was. Because
no,
I
for
would be like,
sure.
what did I actually say? Tell me the words I said. They're like, it's not what you said, it's how you said it. It's like, dude, then
Yeah, I'm accused, or not, thank God, not at present, but historically, I have been accused of like shooting, death beams, death glares out of my eyes and stuff like that, which, you know, first of all, that's not that's not specific to me. I've seen tons of male surgeons have like their little beady eyes and they glare. Like you alluded to, our department of like 10, 15 people, we all don't get on. So everybody is shooting death beams out of their eyes. But I think that because I don't try to pretend that I'm not, that's what really gets people worked up. Is like they're like, you gotta pretend. I mean, you gotta smile. You gotta try. You gotta pretend. Like, oh
no,
no, I don't
no.
think so. I just, but then that makes them take it to the nth level. Like
Right,
that,
right, right.
this type of guy who does want a certain level of like just subservience and submission, that is the thing that I think makes them like just seemingly black out and
It
lose all
it it
control of
makes
their
them lose
faculties.
it. Yes. I
Yeah,
think what it is there's certain guys in this world, I'm learning more and more. They're not used to this. They're not used to this power dynamic, this strong power struggle. And especially in the work field, like these surgeons, they've never seen it before. So I was like, whoa, like, what's your problem? Like, they're probably like, I've never seen a woman like this before. It's like, oh, welcome to the real world, buddy. You're going to see more and more and more of it. Okay. Like, that's my message. Like, good luck.
exactly. But it's the thin skin. It's the doctors don't usually know a lot of people who aren't doctors. Like they don't talk to like non-medical professionals. They're used to being the top of the totem pole. They have the thinnest skin in the world. So like yes, potentially, a female lower ranking or higher ranking or equal ranking person, like it just makes them crazy. And I will say, I know we haven't met in person, but I am 6 feet tall and I'll still wear
Oh,
heels. Like I
wow.
don't care, not to operate or anything, but like I'll wear, so I could be easily 6'3" if I'm like presenting at grand rounds. 6'3", 6'4". That I gotta tell you, that really gets these people going. Cause like, I'm towering over them. Like they think that they're still a quarterback in like their one pony high school, and I'm just like towering over them and just not doing the fake niceties that they expect women to do. They go ballistic.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't like that. So,
So it's just interesting. It's everywhere. I think that when I was younger, I definitely like heard, especially I was around like smarter, older women than me, and I heard them talking about stuff like this, and I never ever got it. But like now it's been time to pay the Pied Piper. When I was 20, I was like, I'm never gonna grow up. I'm always gonna be I'm always going to be 20. I really do like feel this in my bones, and it's helpful to connect with other people who see it. Like if you're young, just know that um these systems and these dynamics are at play, whether you see them yet or not. They very
Mhm.
much are.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really see the world the way I do now, and it took time, right? Like you say, but the more that I'm living and the world is evolving too, I'm like, huh, okay, so this is how things work. And every day is a new lesson.
The quote I really love for this is, "Time is the school in which we learn." I have certainly found that to be true. So, I have a couple more questions for you, but one, what does success look like for you currently, and how has that changed, like, over the course of your life? Talk about all the things, time is the school in which we learn.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, because success used to be all about achievement to me, but now I think it's just more about trying to, I don't even want to say be happy because that was a recent thing that I'm like, that's not going to happen. Trying to pass the time in a meaningful way.
I love that. I think that's very well said. And do you believe in karma? Why or why
I
not?
do. Yeah, I do. It's definitely a theme that I write about and think about a lot and just try to remind myself. Um, I think, what goes around comes back around for sure. And I'm still experiencing that all the time and just trying to stay grateful and humble and still trying to figure things out. And, uh, you know, life is funny and definitely karmic, but
Yeah. Wonderful. And my final question is, what's next for you as a writer and advocate?
well, so I'm trying to switch gears now and do this kind of like children's books and coloring activity books to keep myself busy and just try to focus more on a lighthearted adventure for my mental health too, because I've been really promoting and marketing this old story and old chapter of my life that I very much want to move on from, which has really been heavy on my soul. And with the mental health advocacy, I've been just reaching out to various organizations to see how I can, just help promote maybe awareness to things that I've been afflicted with, recovering from drugs and alcohol use, and then um, making programs available to teens and youth in places that where it may not be readily available. And then my efforts are more about kind of educating kids. So yeah,
That's
those are
awesome.
some goals. The
Yeah,
future.
can't
I
wait.
mean, it's a lot. It's lofty, but just trying to keep myself busy. Like it's boring.
I think that that's great. I can't wait to see the children's book and now, the coloring book series as well. I think that's wonderful. Cindy, I want to thank you again for joining me today and sharing your story. This is all a powerful reminder that speaking out against a broken system is sometimes the most important thing that we can do. Where can our listeners find and connect with you online?
Oh, so let's see. I have my Instagram website, which is always a little kind of experimental, but I have my regular website, cindyleaneighbors.com, revamping, and that's always there. And Amazon, I have all my books there. So the new children's book will be released in May, and the ebook will be released in March. And then the coloring book series will hopefully be kind of rolling out this year on Amazon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, perfect. Yep. And we can link that in the show notes.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Of course. Follow me on Instagram at francesmay.md and at Rethinking Residency. Visit my website, rethinkingresidency.com, to learn more about resident physician stories and ways that residents can most effectively navigate the game of residency. And check out my new show, Surgeon Interrupted, launching in spring 2025. The final and 52nd episode of Promising Young Surgeon will be out next week.